Do we have too much government?
We need to put people ahead of corporate profits.
This system is so lopsided.
This threat is a real threat to democracy.
And I think that's really important. That's something we haven't been doing in this country for a long time.
Where do you start? What do you do? How do you do it?
Access to Democracy and other Eagan community television programming is supported by Thomson Reuters, makers of Westlaw Next and based in Eagan. Through Westlaw Next and other innovative online services, Thomson Reuters is the world's leading source of intelligent information for businesses and professionals. Online at thomsonreuters.com. And by U.S. Federal Credit Union, the member-owned financial institution offering service, value, and experience you can trust to the greater Twin Cities community.
Hello, and welcome to this edition of Access to Democracy. I'm your host today, Steve Francisco, and it's a real pleasure for me to welcome two of Minnesota's most distinguished retired public officials. We have with us today former United States Senator Rudy Boschwitz, Republican who represented Minnesota in the U.S. Senate from 1979 to 1991. Senator Boschwitz also served on the U.S. Senate Budget Committee and was later appointed after you left the Senate by President Bush to be U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations Conference on Human Rights.
That's right.
And our other guest today, an old friend of mine too, Congressman Martin Sabo, who entered public life at the ripe age of 22 years of age in 1960 when you were elected to the Minnesota House of Representatives. Went on to a long career in the House, including 5 years as Speaker of the Minnesota House before
6 years.
6 years.
6 years.
Before going to Washington when Don Fraser came back to Minneapolis, became mayor, and Congressman Sabo succeeded Congressman Fraser. During his time in Congress, Congressman Sabo also served as chair of the House Budget Committee from 1993 to 1994. Did we get the basics correct, gentlemen?
You're right on target.
All right, good way to start. So I think it's fair to say that Martin Sabo and Rudy Boschwitz, you two gentlemen come from opposite ends of the political spectrum. Rudy Boschwitz, Republican, Martin Sabo, Democrat. So what is it about this issue of the national debt and specifically this organization, Fix the Debt, that has brought you two together as partners?
Well, first of all, we're not from opposite ends. I think we were both moderates in our party, and as a matter of fact, during our time in Congress together, my office worked often with Morty's and very successfully.
Yeah, I found Rudy a very good person to work with. And just, you know, we voted differently on some things.
Sure.
But there were a whole host of issues where we voted on the same side. Mm-hmm. And I think that is one of the messages of the Fix the Debt, is that people who voted differently need to come together again. But we could back, and that's what we hope people would do. We had a major recommendation on Social Security in the early 80s from O'Neill.
1983, I believe, right?
A Reagan Commission. We both voted for it. Mm-hmm. We had a major budget agreement in 1990. We both voted for it. So, you know.
So that was a time when you would see Democrats and Republicans collaborate, but something that we haven't seen very much of lately in our politics, is it?
Are you talking about the budget that passed in October?
Of 1990, yeah.
When this fellow who said, "Read my lips,"
yeah,
no new taxes,
yeah,
and he signed the tax bill.
That's right.
Mm-hmm. And
that was Bush president number one.
I voted for it because I thought it was the right thing to do.
Yeah.
But it didn't help me in the election.
No.
Yeah.
So let me ask you about this, gentlemen. The past few years, we've seen Congress and the Obama administration square off against each other repeatedly over increasing the debt ceiling, difficulties in coming together with a budget. difficulties that have led to our debt rating being downgraded. And we've seen Congress create a so-called fiscal cliff that has led to the current sequestration, where we now have across-the-board spending cuts that affect many federal programs. Not all. There are some exceptions, as we know. Is this really any way for a great nation to handle its budget and fiscal affairs, Senator Boschwitz?
Well, it's not the way not the preferred way. That's for sure. But there is a great deal of friction between the sides, and though many people say it's worse than it's always been, I'm not sure that that's the case. We were always at odds with the Democrats.
Philosophically, right.
Well, sure. And so it's not surprising that we have a fiscal cliff or some kind of a thing that automatically makes cuts. It's almost the only way to go sometime.
Congressman Sabo?
I think it's far from ideal. And I would like to see them, for a change, try and do a budget in the normal way, passing a budget resolution, which is broad guidelines, coming to some agreement, and then passing implementing legislation. That is historically what's happened. Never easy when it's divided control, but over the years it's worked, and that just isn't happening now. We go to these crises and you get a meeting of top leadership with the president. I always say, as it relates to leadership in Congress, they and their staff are not nearly as smart as they think they are. And they leave the people who know the substance of the committees behind someplace. So I think it's a disaster to watch, and we desperately need some understanding that they need to come to accommodation.
Right.
And but then also let the legislative process work in some
To work
fashion.
its will.
And it's divided. It's a Republican
Right.
Senate, Democratic Senate. They obviously are going to pass different things.
Yeah.
But at some point, they're going to have a solution that has lots of things they don't individually like in it.
Well, Marty, as you know, one of the problems has been that the Democratic majority in the Senate hasn't passed the budget until more recently.
They did this year.
Yeah, but
Now the House Republicans don't want to go to a budget conference with them.
well,
Yeah, that's,
both sides, as I understand it, are not anxious to go to conference, but they'll have to at some point.
At some point they have to.
So-
And actually, you know, unless they pass semi budgets, because in part of their agreements, they set the limit on discretionary domestic spending and defense spending in those agreements, which is one of the big things a budget resolution does.
One of the things I'd like to ask you about here today as we get into this, there's a lot of misunderstanding about when we start talking about the national debt. And Congressman, maybe you could enlighten our viewers a little bit. What is the national debt? What makes up the national debt? How big is it right now?
Well, historically, after World War II, our debt was, I measure in terms of relationship to GNP,
Right.
was over 100% of
Which we
GNP.
should explain, gross national
National
product, or
product.
now they call it
And it-
GDP, gross
yeah.
domestic product.
And that
Yeah.
gradually declined until the 1980s. So the whole post-World War II period, when we did lots of good things, at times had deficits, that relationship was going down. And then we started moving in the other direction. And then in the 80s, in the 90s, we had the 1990 budget agreement we agreed to. We had the 93 bill when President Clinton was president. And a later one when the Republicans controlled the Congress and Clinton was president. We started having a decline, again, in the GNP in relationship to GNP. And now it's exploded. And our group thinks we should stabilize it and put it on a downward trend.
Right. The figure that I had seen on, I believe it was on the Fix the Debt website, suggested that the current national debt is in excess of 16.7,
No, it's close to 17, yeah.
close to $17 trillion, which works out to about $53,300 of debt for every man, woman, and child in the United States. And we live in a country with 315 million Americans, and that the debt is growing on average by about $3.8 billion a day since 2007. Do you know how, Senator Boschwitz, how big is that as a percentage, to try to give this figure? Because it's hard for people to wrap their head around a figure this big. So how big is the debt as a percentage of the economy? Would you know?
Of the GDP, it's 70 or
75%,
Yeah.
something like that, and growing.
But the debt is going down. It's no longer what did you say, per day?
3.8 billion a day. Yeah.
It's now running at the moment about 2 billion a day, and that's a substantial amount of money. I don't mean to say that it's not, but there have been some slowdowns. The sequester has slowed it down. They're collecting a little bit more money than they did before. People are now, if they look at their paychecks, their Social Security withholding has gone up, and so that they've gotten more money than they did last year, and they've slowed down spending a little bit.
In fact, I noticed CBO delivered a little bit of good news this week. We learned that the annual deficit has fallen 32% over the first 7 months of this fiscal year compared to the same period last year. And CBO, as you mentioned, Senator, tax collections were up. Rose by 220 billion, or about 16% over what they were last year at this time. So are there any lessons that either of you see from those slight improvements? Now, granted, we're talking about 1 year's improvements over last year, but noting that revenues are up, noting that some tax increases have kicked in for the very highest incomes to capture more revenue. Are there some lessons we can learn from that, and spending cuts?
There have not been increases in taxes from the highest paying. They haven't participated in that. They won't start paying those kind of higher taxes till next year. What has changed this year is that everybody who works, their paycheck will have noticed on the 1st of January and thereafter has gone down. More income has come in that way. Less spending has been done because of sequester. Combination of the two, the budget gets better. However, the long-term outlook has not
It's
gotten
still
better.
problematic.
Has not gotten better.
Yeah. Obviously, an important part of getting down is get the economy going again.
Right.
And,
Yes.
and as the economy gets going, that does bring, reduce the deficit. But the problem is that the long-term projections still are, unless we do more, it'll reverse even with a growing economy and start growing. That's why we need some additional action taken.
So Fix the Debt, in looking at the website for the organization, one of the issues, or one of the points that your organization makes, is that you don't endorse any single specific plan to reduce this large national debt, but that there are several concepts that you think are perhaps useful. The Simpson-Bowles Commission recommendations, Domenici-Rivlin,
Yeah.
and those are mentioned by Fix the Debt as being potential frameworks for a longer-term deal to reduce the debt, because they're seen as comprehensive, that would include entitlement reform, raising revenue, reducing spending further, and maybe doing some tax reform. Comment about that. What type of entitlement form do you think
First, let us
needs to be pursued?
First, let us comment about entitlements. An entitlement means that if you're over 62, you're entitled to something. That if you're over 65, you're entitled to Medicare, without regard to what it costs the government. And it is that part of the budget that has grown most rapidly. And entitlements now constitute 67, about 2/3.
Yeah, close to it.
And then there are the appropriated accounts, so-called. The appropriated accounts come up every year, and the Congress appropriates money for specific purposes, for education,
Right.
to make the government work, to pay for the courts, to pay for defense, to pay for the Department of Energy and so forth. All of those are individual appropriations bills that are passed every year. And your listeners or your viewers might know about continuing resolutions. When they can't agree, they continue the old
At the same
numbers.
funding level for the next
So
year.
for the
right?
next year. And so that's the more controllable part of the budget. It is the uncontrolled part of the budget, the entitlements that need to be. And my friend Morty and I look at it a little differently. Social Security is not a difficult program to fix. And it's my contention, if we fix Social Security, that the Congress will have so much gain in credibility, they'll be able to fix the much more difficult programs of Medicare and Medicaid, they being the three largest entitlements.
Let me just interject. It seems sometimes I feel a little uncomfortable when we throw this term entitlement around, because really it should be noted too that for most people it's actually an earned entitlement that they and their employers have paid in the taxes to receive those benefits. Now granted, not for everybody. Certainly there are children, Social Security disability, people who may be on SSI.
Yes, right.
Or people with disabilities and that. So it's not like when we say entitlement, there's this idea of the government just giving something to somebody.
no, it's,
That's not really accurate, is it?
Well, in the
For
case-
most people.
In the case of Medicaid, it is accurate. In the case of
For
Medicare,
low-income people.
Yes.
You're right.
yeah. In the case of Medicare and Social Security, yes, you've had it withheld. Most people receive more in their retirement because they live longer, and than they paid in. So it and the number when Social Security started, the 45 people working for everyone retired, and the life expectancy was around 65, and that's when Social Security kicked in. So the Social Security fund was in great shape, but in the
Things
meantime,
have changed. The baby boom generation that I'm a part of, we're going to be retiring, 80 million of us retiring in droves within the next few years. We're already on the cutting edge of it. But what I want to ask is this, could I just ask this, Martin?
Okay.
I'll let you make that point
Okay.
too. I want to ask, I understand that Fix the Debt doesn't endorse any specific
Yeah.
overall solution. What types of changes to Social Security are you advocating then?
We're not, but do you?
he's as I said, we have different views here.
Yeah, I agree with, in describing entitlements, some are partially paid for, I
Yes.
guess is the best description.
Right.
In the long term, they all have problems in part because they're only partially paid for. And, and Rudy's right that the Social Security problem is not as difficult as the Medicare or Medicaid problems to deal with. They're larger in the projection. growth
Actually,
there-
those problems come sooner than the
That's-
shortfall
yeah.
in Social Security,
Social
as I
Security, I
understand.
think it's fair to say that they have not created the current problem. It's currently running a surplus. But they do, they are reflected in the long-term deficit
Right.
problems. But I don't think you can deal with it separately. I think you have to deal with that in the context of developing support, not only Social Security, but clearly you've got to deal with the revenue issue on what revenue is coming in. At the same time, you deal with Social Security to have any chance of passing a bill.
Right.
And so that's why I think you have to do it in
So what-
conjunction with other things.
So where we're at, it sounds like, gentlemen, is Social Security, you both are in agreement that there are going to have to be changes, but you don't necessarily endorse changes to raise the retirement age, increase the payroll taxes on taxing wages over $113,700, which is the amount of taxable
When
wages this
somebody's
year.
negotiating, I expect all of those things are going to be on
Yeah.
the table.
Sure, everything would be on the table.
And that's what they have to negotiate, that combination. But Rudy did a good job describing the difference between appropriations and
Right.
entitlements. The fact is, when they don't deal with the long-term impact of entitlement spending, what gets really clobbered every year are discretionary spending. You look at the sequestration, the bulk of that is unappropriated dollars, very little from entitlements. So for people who have concern over a whole host of funding of very important programs in this country, and some of my Democratic fans say never anything on entitlements. And
you think they're mistaken, they're wrong.
I think they're wrong because the impact is they're going to devastate.
Is on the very things that they care the most about, presumably.
Well,
it's just,
you're not going to balance the budget if you just attack 1/3 of it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Let me read something to you. I came across a quote by Paul Krugman, Nobel Prize-winning economist, writes for the New York Times, and I want to read this short statement to you and then get both of you to react to it. He said this about the Simpson-Bowles proposal, which Fix the Debt says this could be a framework, or some of it could be a framework. This is what Paul Krugman said, quote, Simpson-Bowles is terrible. It mucks around with taxes, but is obsessed with lowering marginal rates despite a complete absence of evidence that this is important. It offers nothing on Medicare that isn't already in the Affordable Care Act, and it raises the Social Security retirement age because life expectancy has risen, completely ignoring the fact that life expectancy has only gone up for the well-off and the well-educated, while stagnating or even declining among people who need the program most. Would you agree or disagree with Mr. Krugman's comment?
I would disagree.
You would what?
Disagree. And I think, I agree with Krugman on some things. I would agree with him that there was a need for a stimulus. I would agree with him that you need to be cautious as you go into short-term budget savings so you don't slow down the economy. I think he is vastly over-optimistic that the Congress, if things are going a little better, will then deal with the deficits. I think part of dealing with the current economy are making sure you get the current economy going, but also to deal with the long-term deficits, which I think, and economists can quarrel over all kinds of impact.
And they do.
Over long-term deficit. One thing is clear, we are today living with very low interest rates. I think artificially low interest rates. At some point, they are going to increase substantially. And what's going to explode in cost for the federal government is federal interest cost.
The cost of borrowing money.
Cost of borrowing the money
to
we're
finance
borrowing
debt.
today is going to cost much more when interest rates go up. And rather than historically when we borrowed, we paid interest cost. People in our country, a significant part of those increased interest costs it's going to be money that we simply send elsewhere in the world.
Well,
Senator Boschwitz?
first of all, I've never heard what Mr. Krugman has written about here, that people's lives only among the well-to-do have been expanded. I've never heard that before, and I don't believe he's correct. But I believe Marty is correct, that if interest rates go up and it gets to 6%, which it has been for most of our lives, it would be $1 trillion on $16.5 trillion worth of debt. $1 trillion of interest every year, which would just throw the whole budget into just terrible territory.
Let me ask you this, Senator Boschwitz.
Yes.
You know, we talked earlier in the interview about how there are some hopeful signs about the economy gradually improving, that unemployment claims are actually down now, unemployment rates going down a little bit, although there are a lot of people who've stopped looking for work because they're frustrated. But my question is this to you. As the economy gradually improves, does it make the mission of an organization like yours, Fix the Debt, does it make it more difficult to convince people that this is a problem of great urgency that needs to be addressed?
Well, Congress doesn't act unless it's very urgent.
Unless there's a crisis.
Unless there's a crisis. So if the crisis goes away, in the sense of solving this problem, it may be more difficult. I like Simpson Bowles. I like anything that will balance the budget, and everybody has got to take a little hit, that's all. And
So you would favor then increases in revenue, raising some taxes to help
well, everybody,
reduce the debt in addition to
in
spending
my
cuts?
opinion, it's not the fact that we tax too much, but rather that we spend too much. So I'm much more comfortable with reducing the rate of spending growth. It doesn't have to reverse itself, but if it grows more slowly than the economy, we can catch up. We had these discussions, the kind of discussions we're having about the budget today. They were
30
being
years
had
ago.
when Marty and I we
First
arrived in the
came.
Congress the same year. They were talking about it then. I used to go to the White House with several members of the Budget Committee and talk to Ronald Reagan about it. We thought the budget deficits during that period were terribly excessive. And so this is not a new problem. Anything that will fix it, that I didn't like Mr. Krugman's remarks. I think he's just plain wrong about people are living longer. I mean, if they go to the doctor, they're living longer. Doctors are better. They know what to do. And it's just remarkable, the advance of science.
Let me ask you this, because our time's starting to wind down. Both of you have been retired for a little while. How is life after Congress for both of you? And do you ever miss it? Do you ever wish you were back in Washington in the thick of it, Martin?
I have no regrets to be gone.
You don't miss it a bit.
I don't miss it. I enjoy being back in Minnesota and enjoying life.
I think, it's a good life here.
Yeah.
No question about it. And, we came back, unusually, Marty and I came back from Washington because most guys stay on and become lobbyists and
That's
so
true.
forth.
Right.
The grandkids are here, our four sons are here, and that's, I would have lost my wife if I decided to stay in Washington, and that's certainly
Not a good choice at all.
not at all.
It's a much
So-
simpler life living here.
That's right. So if people
But
want to learn,
in answer to your question, I do miss it. It was great fun. It was very challenging, and when you wanted to get something done, people picked up the phone.
yeah. So a little tougher to get phone calls returned when you're no longer a senator.
Oh, there's no question about that.
That's true, but boy, it's changed also, I have to say, Rudy. You left in 1990.
Yeah.
If I'd left in 1990, I think I'd say I'd missed it.
Yes.
Looting in 2006.
Yeah. When
By
you
then,
left in '06?
Yeah.
We're just about to run out of time. We have on the screen right now, if people would like to learn more about Fix the Debt, there's the web address. You can go on. There's lots of interesting information and further elaboration on some of the very things that we've talked about this afternoon. I want to thank both of you, Senator Boschwitz and Congressman Sabo. Thank you for your years of service to the people of Minnesota, and thank you for being our guest today on Access to Democracy. Also, I'd like to mention my name is Toby. The book here by Alan Miller is now available. Check our website at accesstodemocracy.com. Thank you for joining us.